In today's video, we're going to be going over all of the HTML and CSS required to create this Spotify-inspired website. Let's get started now. Before we get started actually coding this website, I want to give a huge shout out to Ed over at the DevEd YouTube channel, who actually came up with all of the designs for this site, and they look absolutely amazing. If you want to learn how to create these exact designs, make sure to check out his video on creating the designs for this website, which are going to be linked in the description below and the cards above. So now that we got that out of the way, let's get started actually coding the website. To get started, I just have Visual Studio Code open on the left here, and I have our design open on the right so that we can reference it. And inside of this images folder, I have all of the images that I've extracted from this design that we're going to need, and all of these can be found in the GitHub, which is linked in the description below. To get started, we just need to create a new index.html page, and this is just going to represent our landing page on the right here. To get started with a typical boilerplate HTML in Visual Studio Code, just type exclamation point and hit enter, and it'll enter in all this default information. And since our application product is called Soundwave, we'll use Soundwave as the title of our page. So now let's open that up using Live Server, and as you can see, we get Soundwave as our title, and that looks perfect. Let's go back over to our mockup so we can see what we need to design. As you can see, at the top here, we have our header, which is going to be the same on all of our pages. We have our 3 different pages, and all of them have the exact same header. And as you can see, our background color is the same, and the layout of our content is also the same between all of our pages. We have content on the left, and then content on the right. And that's the same for all of our different pages. So we're going to be able to reuse a lot of our code on all of our different pages. Lastly, the similarities is we have a footer on 2 of our pages, which we can duplicate between the pages and again share more code. So to get started, let's just work on creating this header that we see up here, because that's going to be shared between all of our pages. The first thing that we're going to want to do is we're going to want to use the header tag instead of HTML to define that we're going to be using a header, and then inside of here we're going to want to put our link for our homepage, which is going to be this Soundwave section we see here. So we're just going to have a link. We want the href for this to be going to the homepage, which is just going to be a slash. And since this is our brand logo, we're just going to give it a class here of brand logo so that we can access this in our CSS. Then inside of here, we want to put both our image and our text inside of here. So we'll put an image tag, and we're going to give this a source here, which is just going to be inside of our images folder. We have logo.png. Close that off, and then after that, we need to put our actual text. So we'll just do that inside of a div, which we're going to give a class here of brand logo name so that we know it's the name of our brand logo, and we'll put the name Soundwave in there. And if you save that and look over here, we have our logo and our text, which is perfect. Next, we want to work on the other section of our navigation, which is going to be these 2 links over here. And since these are actually nav elements, we're going to want to put them inside of a nav element, and then we're just going to make an unordered list with some list items for each of our different elements. And again, these are links, so we're going to want to use anchor tags for these. And this one is going to be pointing to our discover page, which we are going to create later. So it'll point to discover.html. And inside of here, we'll just put discover. And we can copy that and just do the exact same thing, but for join instead of discover. Now, as you can see, we have our 2 different links here, and our header has all of our different HTML content that we need for it. From here, let's create a new file. We'll just call it styles.css. And this is where we're going to put all the styles that we're going to share between all of our different pages. Also, let's include that style inside of our header here. So just go in here, add a link tag, give it an href of styles.css, and we need to tell it that this is a styles sheet. So now we're actually importing our styles, and the first thing that I want to do is use box sizing across our entire application, because that'll make sizing things so much easier. So we just want to do that for all of our elements inside of our entire application, including the pseudo elements. And we'll just say that we want box sizing to be border box, because this will just make widths and heights much easier to deal with. Next, to make sure things are actually working, let's style our background color for our body. So we can select that color straight here from our design, copy that over, select our body, just going to set the padding to 0, the margin to 0, and we want to set the background color to be this color that we just copied over. And if we save that, you should see that we're now getting that nice dark bluish black color on our background. Next, we actually want to import the font that we're going to be using, which is coming from Google Fonts. I've already copied over the URL that we need to paste in here, and as you can see, we're selecting the sizes 400, 500, and 700 for this Poppins font. Next, we can just set our font family for our entire application here to be using that font. We can just say Poppins, and we'll give it a default fallback font as sans serif if it for some reason cannot download this Poppins font. Also, I'm going to slightly increase the font size of our application just so it's easier for you guys to see. Now that we've got a lot of that boilerplate out of the way, let's start actually styling this navigation. The first thing we want to do is style the brand logo that we set apart at the beginning. We'll just make that a display of flex so that our items will be right next to each other, side by side. We're going to align them in the center so that the text will line up perfectly in the center of the logo, and we'll slightly increase our font size here to 1.25 EM. And if we save that, you see that we now get our font size showing up here slightly larger, and to make our color of it actually show up white, we'll just use color inherit, and then on our body, we'll set the color of our entire application here to be white. Now if you say that, you see we're getting white text for our link instead of that bluish purple color. Also, if we want to get rid of the underline for our link, we just use text decoration here, set that to none, and now that's looking really great. Now we can select our actual logo name here, which we just called brand logo name, and we just want to give this a little bit of a margin on the left side so that it's not quite right up against our logo there. And if we say that, we see that that now looks pretty good and a lot like our mockup. Next, we're going to want to style our actual navigation here. So inside of our HTML, let's go to our nav, and we'll just add a class here of main nav so that we can select this easier. Now we can just select that main nav class and start applying the styles we want for our navigation. And with our main nav selected, we want to select the UL element inside of it, change the display here to be flex, remove all of the margin and padding that are defaulted to UL elements, change the list style to none to remove those dots on the side, and that's all we need to do for our UL. And as you say that, we see that everything is nice and close together. Next, what we want to do is actually select our anchor tags themselves so that we can style them to be spread apart and have the different coloring that we want. First, we can set the color to inherit, so it'll be a white color, remove the underline by using text decoration none, and lastly, we could just add a little bit of padding here to 1 rem. And if you say that, you see that we now get nice little padding around our different elements. Also, we want to style them slightly different when we hover over them, so we can select our main nav here again, select the anchor tag, and when we hover it, all we want to do is just change the color to be slightly darker, and we're just going to use this slightly darker gray color. And if you save that and we hover over, you see that we get our slightly darker gray color to indicate that these are hoverable and selectable. The last thing we need to do is make it so that these two elements are on the same line. So to do that, we just want to add a class to our header here, and we'll just call it main header. And now inside of our CSS, we can use that main header class to select our header. And all we want to do inside of here is just change it so that everything is lined up side by side. Easiest way to do that is by using flexbox, so we'll display it as flex. We want to justify our content with space between, which is just going to push these elements as far apart as possible. And lastly, we want these items to be in the dead center vertically, and if you save that, you see that our items are now as far apart as possible and centered so that everything is in a nice even line across. Also, in order to give our heading a little bit of space from the top of the screen and space below it, we're going to give it a height here, and we're just going to give it a height of 140 pixels. Now as you see that it's pushed away from the top of the screen, and there's also space below it where items won't write up right next to it. And if we look at our design, you can see that it's just like what we have here. Also, if we look at our design even more, you can see that our items only expand to a certain width on our screen and don't go all the way to the very edge of the screen. And as you can see, everything on the entire page falls inside of this container that is just a certain width maximum. So let's implement that into our page. In order to do that, we can just add a class to our body element here, and we're just going to call it container. Then inside of our CSS, we can just select that container class, and all we want to do is give it a max width here, which we'll just set to 1200 pixels. We want to give it a margin of 0 on the top and bottom, and auto on the left and right, which will just center everything in the center of the screen if it's wider than 1200 pixels. And we want to give it a little bit of padding away from the edges of our screen, so we'll just give it 40 pixels of padding on the left and right. Now if you save that, you see that our items are pushed in slightly from the edge of the screen, and if we increase the size of our screen, you see that once it gets large enough, they just stay dead center without growing any further. And that's exactly what we want. It even works when it gets incredibly small or incredibly large. The next thing we want to work on is the actual sizing of the content in our pages. As you can see, each one of these pages is essentially a full height page at a minimum. As you can see on our desktop view, we want this to be a full height page, another full height page, and another full height page. So in order to do that, there's a nice little trick we can use with Flexbox to make this incredibly easy. First, we need to go to our body element up here, and we need to set the minimum height of our page to be 100 view heights. Essentially, this just means it'll be 100% of the height of the screen as the minimum height of the body, which means all of our content will be pushed from the top to the very bottom at a minimum, but it can grow past that if, for example, we're on a small device such as a phone. We're then going to use a trick with Flexbox by adding this class here called full height grow. And inside of here, all we're doing is changing the display to flex and the flex direction to column. By doing this, we essentially don't change anything about how the items in our page are laid out vertically, since column changes it so that Flexbox lays things out vertically instead of horizontally. But we do add the ability to be able to add in flex grow properties in order to make one element of our section grow to the entire height of our page. In our case, that is 100 view heights. So in our example, if we just go to our index here and make our body be our full height container, or full height grow, I think is what we called it. There we go. And then our next section that we create after this header, we just want to give it a flex grow of 1, and it will take up the entire remaining height of the page. Let's just show that quickly with a div here. And we're just going to rudely style it here with the style tag. We'll put flex grow to be 1, and we'll just put a background color of red in here. And if we close that off and save, you'll see that that red div grows to fill the entire height of our flex height grow container, which in our case is 100% of our screen. If we remove flex grow from this, you can see that it no longer grows to the full height. So using this full height grow class, which all it does is display flex and flex direction column, we can create a single section of our application that fills all the remaining height of our page. And this is going to be incredibly useful when we design these element sections of our different pages. So now let's work on creating this element section here. The first thing that we need to do is just remove this div here and add in a section which we're going to give a class of home main section, since this is the main section on our home page. And inside of here we have essentially two sections. We have our left section and our right section. So let's create two divs for these different sections. We'll have one div here which is going to be in our image section, and we'll have another div here which is going to be our text section. And this div here, we're just going to give a class here of image wrapper. And inside of here, we're going to put our image of the lady. But we don't want to use an actual image tag, such as this with a source, because we need to do some fancy tricks of scaling this so that it'll always show up at the bottom of our screen. So instead, we're going to use a div with a class of lady image, just so that we can uniquely identify this. And we're going to use a background image property to put the image exactly where we want it inside of this div. Then inside of this second div, we need to put all of our text content that we see over here. The first thing that we're going to have is our h1, which is going to have a class of title, since this is the main title of our section. And in here, we'll just put feel the music, if I can type. There we go. And then we'll want to have a span, and that span will have a class of subtitle. And the reason we're using these classes of subtitle and title is because, as you can see throughout our application, we have other instances where we have a title and subtitle system, so we can just reuse these classes to make our styling of these sections easier. Then inside of here, we just want to put that text, stream over 20,000 songs with one click. There we go. I'm very slow typing, unfortunately. And then lastly, we just want to put our button, which we're going to use an anchor tag, since this button is just going to link to a different page. So we'll give it an href here to the join.html page, which we still have yet to create. And we'll give it a class of button so that we can style it as we want to. Then the text, join now. And if we save that and go over to our page here, you see that we have our title, our subtitle, and our join now button. So now we can actually work on styling our different sections over here to look exactly as our design over here. To do that, we're going to add another style sheet into our page. This one we're just going to call index.css. And the reason we're doing this is just to make it easier to see where our different styles are inside of our application. So let's go in here and we'll just create an index.css style sheet. And this is just going to be the styles for our index page only. And inside our styles.css is where we're going to have all of our shared styles that we're using across every page still. So the first thing that we can do inside of our shared style sheet is add the styles for our title and subtitle, since these are going to be shared across our entire application. For our title here, we just want to change the font weight to be 500, since it's just a slightly bolder font than our default font. The font size is going to be much larger at 3 EM. Want the margin bottom to be 1 REM, and the margin top is going to be 0. So if we save that, you see that we now get our nice large text here, which lines up a lot like with what we have over here in our mockup. Next, we can work on the subtitle. And the subtitle is going to be very similar. We just want the font weight to be slightly bolder at 500. The font size here is going to be 1.2 EM. And we want the margin bottom to be 2 REM, so it just has a little bit of space between it and the things that are below it. And now we can work on styling our button. So we can select our button here. We want the color to be white. We want the background color to be that blue color that we can select from our mockup here. So let's just click on this, get that blue color from here, and we can just paste that in just like that. We'll add a little bit of padding to it so that we have space between our background and our text. So we'll just use 0.7 REM and 1.5 REM to give it a nice bit of padding around it. A nice little bit of border radius. We'll just use 0.5 REM so that our corners are slightly rounded. Text decoration to remove the underlining around it. And if we save that, we take a look and that looks pretty good. And let's just change our font size here to be slightly different. So we'll use 0.9 REM, for example. And if we save that, there we go. It's just a little bit smaller. Now that we have those base styles out of the way, let's work on our specific styles for our main section. We can select our main section here by doing home main section, which is that class we created, which wraps everything. And we want to display this using Flexbox. We want to align the items inside of here to stretch to be the full height of the container. And then we're just going to justify the content again with space between, since we want as much space as possible between the two elements in our section. And lastly, we'll add flex grow to be 1 here, since we want this to fill the entire space of our remaining height in our page. And if you can save that, you see that we have our content as spread out as possible. Next, let's work on the more complicated section of our two-sided layout, which is the image of the woman. So we can select that by using our home main section here and selecting the image wrapper inside of it. And we want to make this flex grow as well. So we can set the flex grow to 1, just so it'll take up as much space as possible inside of our screen, left to right. Change the flex direction of this to be column, since we're going to make it as well be a display of flex, and this means that it'll be a vertical flex direction inside of it, which will allow us to push things to the very bottom of it, which is what we need to do with our image. Also, we want to align the items inside of here to be stretch as well, and we want to justify the content to be flex end, which will mean it'll push the image as close to the text over here as possible, since it's going to push it to the right as far as possible. Then we can select the actual background element, which is just going to be inside of our home main section. We want to select the lady image, and this is going to be the actual background element that we put the background image on. First, we can just use the background image property to use our background image. So we'll use URL, get our images folder, and the landing page girl.png. There we go, that's perfect. Expand this a little bit so it's all in one line. And then next, we want to set the flex grow of this again to be a flex grow of 1, so it'll grow to the full height of the section it's inside of. Then we can give it a max height, which in our case, we don't ever want this to be larger than 70% of the height of our screen. And we'll give it a min width, which is just going to be here, 30% of the width of our entire screen, because we don't ever want this image to become incredibly small. Also, we can change how the background will actually appear, so we'll use background size here of contain, so that way it'll fit the entire image inside of it without cropping out anything or scaling it unnaturally. We can also change the background to repeat to be no repeat, since we only want the image to ever show up once. And then the very last but most important thing that we can add here is the background position, and we want to change the position to be in the bottom left of our container. This will hopefully push it as close to the bottom of our page as possible. And if you save that, you see that we now get this image showing up perfectly here down at the bottom of our page. And if we expand our page, you can see that it'll grow as we want it to, but it won't get bigger than 70% of the height of our screen. And this is exactly perfect, and it'll shrink down really small, and this is really great. Now let's work on styling this second section of our page. We need to add a class here to that div since we didn't actually do that yet. We'll just add a class here of call to action since this is the call to action of our page. And now instead of our index.css, we can select that by selecting the main section here and the call to action section inside of that. And this is going to be a lot more straightforward for what we actually want to style. First thing we want to do is change the display to flex again so everything lines up right next to each other. And then since we want it to be above each other, we can change the flex direction to be column, and now you can see everything's lined up top to bottom. So that all of our content doesn't expand to fill the entire width, we can just change here our line items to be flex start. And if you say that, you see that now everything is the perfect width that we want. And we can change our margin around this item to be 1 rem so that we just have spacing between our actual image and our text. Then lastly, we want to align this text in the center of our screen. So we can just use the align self property and change it to center, and this will align it in the center of its flex container. And there we go, now it's aligned in the dead center of this container section of our screen. And as we expand and collapse the size of our screen, you see that our image is growing and shrinking as we want it to. But as you can see, when we get a fairly small screen size such as here, our image becomes so small that the page doesn't really work with this image. So let's add in a media query so that we can remove the image when our screen gets too small. So we add in @media here, and we say that when the maxed width of our screen is 900 pixels, so when the screen is 900 pixels or less, run all of the code inside of here. And we can just select again that home main section, we'll select our image wrapper, and we'll just change the display here to be none so that it'll completely remove this image from our screen. Then we want to change our home main section again, and we just want to change the justify of the content to be in the center since we now want this text section to be in the dead center of our screen. And if you save that and we shrink down our screen size, you can see that as the image gets to a point where it becomes too small to be useful, it disappears and our text becomes in the center of our screen, which is exactly perfect. Now the last thing that we have to add to this page are these different circular elements that you can see here floating in the background, which really add a nice aesthetic to the page. In our HTML, we can just add 3 different div tags to the very bottom of our page, and we'll just give them classes of home page circle 1, and we'll copy that down circle 2 and circle 3. And the reason that we can just throw these in our page anywhere is because we're going to be positioning them absolutely on our page so that they're always in the exact same spot. Now in our index.css, let's actually select those home page circles. So we'll start with circle number 1, which we're going to treat as this bottom left-hand circle here. First thing we want to do is set the position to be absolute. And we want to give it a specific width. In our case, we'll give it a width of 25% of the screen. And we'll make the height exactly the same, so that way we know that it'll be a perfect square. And in order to make this a circle, all we need to do is set the border radius to 50% and it'll be a perfect circle. In order to see this element, let's give it a temporary background color here. We'll just give it a background color of red. And as you can see, we have our circle, which is approximately the same size as this circle here. All we need to do is actually position this circle so that it's in the bottom left-hand corner of our screen. So we can use the bottom property to position it 5% of the screen away from the bottom, and we'll do the same thing with the left property, and we're going to put it again 5% of the screen away from the left. And if you save that, you now see that we have our circle down in the bottom left-hand corner of our screen. All we need to do is get the correct color. So if we copy this, we can get our exact color from here, which we're going to use RGB. Let's copy this in, paste it here. And with Visual Studio Code, we can easily change this to be RGB by just clicking up here. And there we go, we get RGB because we want this to actually be RGBA with a 10% opacity. So change this to be 0.1. And if we go back here, we now see that we get that perfect looking circle color. But we want it to be behind our woman image. So let's change the Z index here to be -1, so it'll be behind everything else by default. And that's exactly perfect. As we scale our page, you can see that this circle shrinks and grows as our page changes so that it never becomes too large or too small for the page. Next, inside of here, we want to create this next circle, which is going to be this blue circle in the top left. So we can again do our home page circle, but this time we'll select number 2. And I'm just going to copy everything from our first circle because it's going to be very similar. We're only going to change a few things. I think the width and the height are going to look perfect for this. The border radius again is going to be 50%. We'll select from here again our color. We'll paste that in and use Visual Studio Code so that we can change it really quickly to RGBA, and that looks perfect. And now all we need to do is worry about our positioning of this element. As you can see, it's slightly offset from the top and the left, so we'll use top here instead of bottom, and we'll change this to 15% of the height of the screen. And with the left, we're going to do exactly the same here, but instead we'll do 30% of the screen. And now if we save this and go back to our page, you can see that we get our circle here. Oh, but we're using the wrong color. So again, copy in that color that we should be using. Make sure that Visual Studio Code sets that to the right value. And now, if we go over, you'll see we save that, we get our blue circle right here, and that again is growing and shrinking with our page size. And we can do, again, the same exact thing with our third circle, but it's going to be slightly different since it's outside of our screen, and we don't actually want to scroll our screen to fit the rest of it. So let's just copy this, what we have so far, and modify it as we need to. We'll change this to be a 3, and we need to change our width and height. In our case, this circle is quite a bit bigger, so we'll change it to be 45 and 45. And we don't actually want a color on this circle because we're going to be using a pseudo element. So we want to select that home page circle 3 again, but we want the before element of that because we're going to put our actual styling of the element in this pseudo selector, so that way it can overflow the parent and not actually cause the page to scroll. And inside of our parent here, we just want to set this to be in the bottom right hand corner. So change top to be bottom here. We'll change this to be 0, and we'll do the same thing, but for right, because we want this in the very bottom right hand corner. And now that is going to be put in a circle as far down in the bottom right of our page as possible. And inside of this before is where we actually want to set the content for our circle. So the first thing we need to do is set a content just to be empty so that something actually shows up. We want to position it absolutely inside of the parent element that it's inside of, which is this circle 3. And we want to set the height to be 100% and the width to be 100% of the parent. And of course, use border radius here of 50% so that it will be a circle. And let's copy this background color from our previous circle since these two circles share the exact same color. So now if we save that and take a look at what we have here, we have our circle, but it's not in the bottom right like we want it to be. We want this to be offset from our page. So what we're going to use is the transform property, and we're going to use what's called translate. And we want to translate that 40% to the right, and again 40% down. And if you say that, you see that our circle is where we want it to be. But we get that problem with our page now scrolling to fit that entire circle. And the reason we nested this circle inside of this circle is so that we can put overflow of hidden on the parent, and if we save that, it now just cuts off all of the outside content that we don't actually want. And to fix the fact that we have a weird looking circle here, we just want to remove the border radius from the parent element since we're not actually making the parent a circle. The parent is just a rectangle which contains a circle inside of it. And there we go. Our home page here now looks almost identical to our mock-up here, which is perfect. And as we increase our screen size, it still looks good, or decreasing our screen size, it still looks pretty good. So now let's move on to creating some of the different pages for Discover and Join. To get started with our Discover page here, we're just going to copy everything inside of our index.html page. Since it's going to be very similar, we'll create this discover.html, paste this all in here, but instead of importing to index.css, we'll import discover.css. We're going to change our title here to be Soundwave Discover. Our header is going to be exactly the same. We don't want to change anything inside of here. And our section down here is going to be different. So let's remove what we have in our section, save that, and go to our Discover page. And as you can see, we have a blank slate to start with. If we look over at our mockup here, we can see that our Discover page, if we expand this so it's a little bit easier to see, has a footer down at the bottom. And the content that's going to be growing is this content in between the footer and the header. So we can't actually have our container class here be on the body of our Discover element, since we don't want to limit the width of our footer to be the width of the container. As you can see here, this footer goes all the way across the full width of our entire page. So we actually need to change this so that our container is no longer containing the footer element, and instead is going to contain everything else inside of it. So in here, we'll add that container class, and we're just going to wrap everything except for the footer in that container class. And there we go. Now that we've moved everything inside of that container class, let's work on styling the footer for our section. It's going to be outside of that container as I talked about, and we'll use the footer element inside of HTML in order to style this footer. And we'll give it a class here, which is going to be main footer. Next, inside of that footer, we're actually going to want to put a container class, which sounds a bit weird since we just took the footer outside of the container and now we're putting everything in the footer inside of a container. But what we want is for this background of our footer to expand all the way to the edge of our page, but the content in the footer, as you can see, lines up perfectly with the borders of this container. Let's make it a little larger so it's easier to see, but you can see this container here lines up perfectly with the content of the section of our footer. So inside of our footer, everything is going to go inside of a container. Now let's get that back so it's smaller so we can start working on our page. And inside of our footer is where we're going to have our different navigations. We're going to have two navs, one on the left here for the about and the contact, and then one on the right for the different social media links. So first here, we'll just put a nav. And this is going to have a class of footer nav, since we're going to want to style both of our navs very similarly. And in here, we'll have an unordered list full of list items, again, just like the header, and each of these are going to have a link. In our case, since we're not actually making these pages, we'll just have these links point to nowhere. And inside of it, we'll say about us for this one, copy this one down, call this contact, and now we have our two different links in here for our about us and content section. And we can copy this nearly exactly for our social media links, paste it down. Again, we want to use that footer nav class since it's going to be styled very similarly. But our links inside of our list items are going to be a bit different since they're going to contain an icon and they're going to contain text. So we're going to want to apply some special styling to this. We'll just call it a social link since it's a social media link. And inside of here is where we're going to put our content. Our first one that we have is going to be Twitter. So we'll change the text inside of here to be Twitter. And we're going to add an image, which is going to have the source of our images folder, and there should be in here a twitter.svg icon. And let's copy this and paste it inside of this list item here. Get our spacing worked out. There we go. And this one is going to be Facebook and using the Facebook image. Now if we look back here and save it, you'll see that we get all of our different links for our footer right here. And we want to style these footer links exactly the same as we styled the header section of our pages. So inside of our styles.css, we can work on styling our footer just like our header. So if we find here our main header, here we go, we can just tack on here main footer, and all we want to take out of here is the height, since the height of our footer is going to be different than the height of our main header. So we'll put our height inside of a separate class for main header, but the rest of the content inside of this main header class can be shared with our main footer. Also, we can share our main nav with our footer nav. So let's select our footer nav, our UL elements inside of it, and same thing down here. We want to select the footer nav, and we want to select the A tag elements, and again, same exact thing here. We want to select our footer nav. Now if you save that, you see that it's already starting to look a lot like our header, but our content isn't lined up side by side. And that's because if you remember right, we added this container class that's wrapping all of our different footer sections. So what we want to do is we want to just add a simple selector here that is going to be for our main footer. And we want to select the container inside of it. In this container, we want to just give a display here of flex. We want to do justify content of space between, and that'll push all of our content away from each other. And if we spell container correctly, there we go, you now see that our content in our footer looks exactly as we want it to. Lastly, we can do some specific styling just to our footer. We can change the height here to be 70 pixels since it's not quite as tall as our header. We want to change the background color, so if we go in here, we can select the background color of our element, get our footer, get that footer section, we'll select the fill color that we want to use. So use background color here, paste in that color that we want, and now if we save that, you see that we get that nice dark background color around it. And lastly, everything inside of here is going to be bolded font, so we can just create bold font here, and we can move on to styling our social links so that they look slightly better. So we remember we created that class called social link, and inside of this class, we want to select the image tag inside of that. We want to change the width to be 1 EM so that our image here is the exact same size as our text, and we'll just add a little bit of margin on the right here. We'll just do 0.25 REM, for example. And if you save that, you now see that our icons are more in line with the size of our text, and they're slightly spaced out from each other. Now we can actually work on adding in the content of our page so that it'll fill in and look nice. So let's go back and look at our design here so that we know what we're working with. Make it slightly larger, and we can work over into here and add in the section that we need. As you remember, this needs to go after our header, but inside of our div container here. So inside of that div container, we'll create a section, and we'll get a class of discover main section. So we can select this in our CSS to style it. Next, inside of here, we're going to have two different sections again, our left section and our right section. So let's create two divs, and we're going to have our first section, which is our left section, which we're going to give a class again of call to action, since this is the call to action for our page. And in here, we have our title, our subtitle, and then our icons in the middle. So we'll create an H1, give it a class of title, which we've already created this title class, so we don't actually have to worry about styling it. And in here, we'll just put the text, which is discover new music. Next, we're going to have our icons section. So we'll create a div with a class of icon section. Inside of this icon section div is where we're going to put our three different icons. So again, we'll use a div to wrap those with a class of icon. And inside of this icon section, all we're going to do is have an image, which is going to be the top part of our icon. So we're just going to have our first one here be from our images, and it's going to be the microphone SVG file. And we'll just put charts as the text for it, and we'll copy this down 2 more times since we're going to have 2 different images, or 2 more icons, sorry. Get our spacing all correct here. And this one here is going to be our albums SVG, and we have our more SVG. And we can change the text inside of these. And there we go. Now our icons are completely done. And the last thing that we need to do is add our subtitle section. So we just want to add here a simple div, which we're going to give the class of subtitle. And inside of here, we're just going to put all the text. I'm just going to copy this over, remove all that extra spacing. And now if we save that and look here, it's looking really good, but it looks like this text is kind of larger than we actually want it to be. So let's actually remove that subtitle text that we created for our class, and we'll save that. And now that looks a lot better. It looks a lot more in line. And lastly, we just want to add in an image here instead of a div actually. So we'll change this to an image. We'll add a class here, which is going to be covers image. So this is going to be the image of all of the covers. And again, the source is going to come from our images folder, and we'll use the covers JPEG file. And now if we say that, we see that I get our cover images, and we have all the different elements that we need from our design over here. We just need to actually lay everything out to look good. And of course, to do that, we're going to use CSS. And we're going to use a discover.css file, which we'll just create here. This is going to be all the styles for this discover only page. Again, inside of here, we're going to use a lot of the same stuff we used from our index.css file. We can actually come in here and copy this main section, change this to be discover main section, and it's going to be exactly the same. And if we save that, you see that now already we have our things spaced out side by side, which is perfect. Next, we want to select inside of our main section here, our covers image. And we want to set this so that it's never too large or too small. So we'll set the width here to be 30% of the screen width. We'll set a margin here on the left side of it to be 2 REM so that it's never quite touching our text too closely. We'll set the height to auto. This will just make it so that our image scales so that it never becomes super stretched out. It'll always be a perfect square. And we're going to give it a max width so that it never becomes too large. And we'll just say 350 pixels, for example. And now you may notice that our image is actually being distorted, and that's because we're using stretch up here, and instead we just want to use center so that everything inside of our page is perfectly centered. Now as you can see, If we scale, our image will scale perfectly, and once the image reaches a certain size, it won't grow any further. This is perfect. Now we can actually work on styling our left section, which is going to be a bit more complicated. The main thing we need to style is our different icons, so first we'll select our icons section, and in order to get our elements to line up side by side, we'll change the display in here to flex. Now, if we save that, you see that everything's lined up side by side, and we can work on styling the actual icons themselves. Again, we want to display these things so that our elements are above and below each other, and we'll use flexbox again for that, but instead we'll change the flex direction here to be column instead of row, and there we go, now everything's above and below each other. We're going to justify the content to have space between so they're as spread out as possible from each other as we increase the height. We'll align the items in the center so that way our images will be directly centered over our text. And now we can work on adding our margin and width. So we'll set a margin of 0.5 rem to give it a little bit of space between each item. We'll want to set a padding here, which is going to be 0.75 rem, which will just allow us to have our nice background color, which we can see over here. We'll have a nice little background around our different elements. We'll set the width to be 100 pixels. And we're going to do the same thing for our height. We'll just set it to 100 pixels as well, since we want these to be perfect squares. And we'll go in here, select these elements so that we can get the actual background color. There we go. So we can set our background color. And if we go look at what we have so far, you can see that these are already starting to look really close to what we want. All we really need to do is add a little bit of a margin to the bottom of this so that it's not right up against our text down below. And we're also going to want to modify the actual images since they're a bit too large. So we'll just change the width here to be 40 pixels. And if you save that, that now looks a lot like what we have over in this section over here, which is really nice. But you will notice that our footer is not expanding all the way down to the bottom of our page. And that's because if you look at our HTML, we don't actually have that full height grow inside of our container here. So let's copy that over, paste it into here, and now our container is going to be growing to fill the full height. But the problem is that our container does not have flex grow on it. If we go into here for our styles.css, find our container class, which is all the way at the bottom, and we add a simple flex grow of 1 onto here, you'll now see that our container is growing, this middle section is growing to fill the full height, which means that our content can actually fit perfectly in the middle of our screen. And as you can see, it scales really nicely as our browser gets larger, but when our browser gets smaller, you'll see that the image on the right really becomes more in the way than anything. So let's actually remove this image just like we did with the index page. To do this, again, we're going to use a media query. We're going to use max width, and we're going to just say 800 pixels is when the image starts to become useless. We'll select that discover main section, and inside of here, we're just going to change our flex direction to be column, and we're going to justify all of our content into the center. This will just mean that our image here is going to show up below our text when our screen becomes too small. So as you can see, as our screen becomes too small, our image shows up at the very bottom. Now we want to spacer out this image so it looks a little bit better. So we'll select that image section, and we want to change the margin on the top to be 2 rem. That way we have a little bit of spacing. We'll want to change the height here to be 30% of the height of the screen so it never becomes too large. And we'll change the width to be auto. This will just make it so that our image will scale off of height instead of width. Now as you can see, this is looking really good on the smaller screen, even when it gets incredibly small, and as it gets larger, you can see the image pops over to the side and looks just like our mockup that we have over here. So now that we have this page done, we can move on to our last page, which is this join page. Since this join page is going to be very similar to our discover page, let's just copy this discover page. We want to change the name here to be join.html, and we're going to create a new file for our CSS, which is just going to be join.css. Instead of our join.html, we can change this to be join.css, change discover to be join here. Our header section is going to be exactly the same. This main section we're going to be changing, so let's remove that. And our footer, again, is going to stay exactly the same. So now if we jump to that join page, you can see we're starting from a clean slate. Let's look at our mockup over here to see what we actually need to style for our page. As you can see, we have some text on the left here which says join the fun, and on the right side we have a nice looking form for people to contact us and join the program. So let's add that into our HTML over here. We want to do it after our header section, and we're just going to give this a section with the class of join main section, just like we did for all of our other sections to make things easy to follow. And on the left side here, we're just going to have some text, which is going to say join the fun. We'll have an h1, which will just have a class of join text so that we know that this is going to be our text that we can select inside of our CSS to make it look nice and cool. And inside of here, we'll say join the, and instead of actually putting fun inside of here, we're going to want to wrap fun inside of its own span with the class of accent text. And this is because this fun actually looks slightly differently since it's this pink looking color as opposed to the white color of the rest of our text, and this will allow us to select just the word fun. Now we're going to have our actual form, which is going to have our name, email, password, and join now button. Let's give this form a class here of join form so we can select this in our CSS, and let's work on adding the different groups of elements we have. So we want to wrap each of our elements inside of an input group so that we can space them out from each other properly, and inside of each of them we'll have a label. So the first one's going to say name, and then we're going to have an input here, and this input is going to have a type of text. There we go. And let's just copy this down a couple more times. So now we're going to have our second input here be email. Change the type here to email. We're going to have password, and we'll change the type here to password. And then lastly, we're just going to want to have one more input group. And this input group is going to be a button instead of an actual input element. So we'll just say button. The type is going to be submit, since it's going to be used to submit our form, and we'll give it a class of button with the text inside of here that says join now. And if we save that and go look over here, you can see that we have all of the different information inside our page we need, and you can see our button is already mostly styled from our styles.css file. So let's just add the last few remaining styles we need in order to finish styling our button. All we need to do is we want to remove the outline from our button, we want to remove the border, and we want to change the cursor so that it's going to be a pointer cursor. And now as you can see, when we hover over that, we get the nice pointer cursor. And we just want to change this slightly so that we can tell when we're hovering over our element. So in order to do that, we're just going to slightly modify our background color here, and we're just going to use a slightly different shade of that blue color that we already had. Now when we hover it, you see it gets slightly lighter, and we're going to do the same thing for focus. So for focus, I'm going to change the background color, but we're going to change it to a slightly different blue color so that we can tell when we have it focused. So now if we tab over onto the button, you can see that we get an even brighter blue color than when we hover over it. Now that we've finished styling our button, let's go over to our join.css here and style the different sections of our page. We'll first start with the join the fun section because it's much easier. The first thing we need to do is select that main section, and we need to change it to be display of flex. We want to justify the content with space between, just like we did in all of our other sections. We'll align the items in the center, and we'll change the flex grow here to be 1. And if you save that, you see that our items are now being positioned in the dead center of our screen on the left and right side, which is perfect. Next, we can select our join text. In our join text, we want to change the font size to be much larger. So we'll change it to 3.5 EM, for example. We want the font weight of this to be bold, since we want it to be nice and bolded on the page and sticking out. And we'll just remove any margins that we have from this H1 element, since headings naturally have margin. And there we go. And lastly, we can select our accent text here, and we can change the color to the color from our mockup. So let's select that text, pull out the color here, and input it into our page. And as you can see, our join the fun is now perfectly done, and we can move on to styling our form. Let's select our form with the join form class that we created, and we can set the background color to be the color from our mockup. So again, let's go into here, select that background color. We want to set the width here to be 50 view height, or view width, I'm sorry, because we want it to fill up about 50% of our screen. And again, we're going to set the max width here to be 50%, because we never actually want it to be larger than 50% of our entire container size as well. Next, we'll use padding of 2 rem, and 4 rem to give it a nice amount of spacing on the left, right, and top so we can see that nice background color. And we'll give it a small border radius around the corners of 20 pixels. And if you save that and come back, we can see that already our form here is starting to look a lot like our other form. Now we can work on styling the input groups that we have to give them nice large amounts of spacing as we have on this page. So we'll select our input groups. And all we want to do here is add a nice amount of margin on the bottom. We'll say 2 rem. We want to change again the display of these to be flex so that we can stack the name and the input below each other. And we'll change the flex direction to be column so that everything is stacked on top of each other, which is perfect. And as you can see, we have that right here as we want. But we want to remove the margin down here from our very last element. So we can just select that very last element of our input group, which is just going to be last child. And we'll just say margin bottom 0 so that that extra spacing at the bottom of our form is removed. Now we can style our actual label, which is very simply just going to be changing the font weight to bold so it stands out more, and adding a little bit of margin on the bottom. We'll say 0.5 rem. Now we got the nice little spacing between our input element and our label. We can work on styling our input element. So we can say input group input, and the first thing we want to do is remove our outline. We want to remove the background color, or just the background in general, sorry. And we're going to change the border to be 1 pixel. We'll make it solid, and we can just go to our mockup again to get that exact color that we're going to be using for our border. Now if we say that, you see that we get our input elements already looking pretty good, but we need to change it so that the input text size is much larger. So we'll change the font size here to be 1 em. We're going to change the padding to be 0.5 em so that there's a little bit of spacing between our element and the text. And since we want the color to be our white color, we'll tell it to inherit from the parent element. And lastly, we'll add a small border radius to our element of just 5 pixels. And if you save that, you see that we get these nice large input elements which we can type into, but we don't have any indication of when we're actually inside of this element, so let's add that. All we need to do is select that input group input elements, and when we focus on those input elements, all we want to do is change the the border color, and we're just going to change it to this nice color here. So now when we select on either of these, you see that our border gets slightly brighter to let us know that we're inside of these input elements. The last thing we need to do with our form is make it so that it looks a little bit cleaner when our page gets incredibly small. So in order to do that, we're going to again use a media query, and we're going to select max width of, let's say, 900 pixels. And inside of here, we're going to select that join main section, and we're going to change the direction, flex direction, to be column. This is so that everything will stack on top of each other instead of side by side. And we're going to justify the content into the center of the page so that everything is lined up nice. Also, we're going to change our join form to be slightly larger. We'll want it to take up 80% of the width of the view. We're going to change the max width here to be inherit. Essentially, this just means that the max width will no longer matter. It'll just inherit from the width of the element. And we're going to add some margin of 2 rem on the top and bottom. So now if we change our page here to decrease our size, you can see that our form is now directly below join the fun, and it looks much better on a smaller screen size. And as we increase it, you can see it side by side, just like our mockup over here where everything is side by side. Now we can finish up by adding in these nice little circles that are on this join us page, very similarly to how we added our circles on the landing page. We're actually going to copy some of the code directly from that section. So let's go into our index.css, and we're going to copy this very last homepage circle, and we're going to paste this into our join, but instead of being a homepage circle, it's just going to be a join page circle. And inside of our join.html, we're going to add those circles here at the bottom. So we'll add a div class of join page circle 1, and we'll do the same thing with circle 2. And let's open this up, and we'll first use this bottom left hand corner as our circle number 1. And again, we're going to use the trick of using these pseudo elements like we have here, so that our elements can overlap the edges of our page without actually making our page scroll. So circle number 1 here, we're going to just change the width here to be 35% of the view width. we want it to be in the bottom left instead of the bottom right. And down here with our translations, we don't want to translate it anywhere on the Y direction. We just want to translate the X. So we're going to change this to be -20% since we want to translate it off the page to the left side. Our height and width and border radius are all perfectly fine. And our color here, we're actually going to want to change to be the red color. So we can just copy this red color from here and paste it here. Now if we look over on our join page, you can see we have our circle exactly where we want it, and it'll scale with our page size just as all of our other circles do. Now let's copy all of this code one last time. We're going to use circle number 2 instead of circle number 1. And for this circle, if we look over at our view here, it's slightly smaller than our other circle, so we're going to use 30 as our width and height here. And we want to position it slightly differently, so we're going to position it slightly off from the left side. The top will still be 0, but the left here is going to be 20 view width. And if we look over here and save that, you see that it's already being positioned fairly well. Let's make sure this is view width, and there we go, that's being positioned exactly where we want it to. And now let's look back over here. Now we need to position our translate of the Y direction instead of the X direction. So we'll translate Y for 30% upwards, essentially, that's what negative is doing. And we want this color to be our blue color, which we can pull in from here. Copy that in to our join. And now if we look over here, we can see that our circles are exactly where we want them. And with that final touch, our entire page is complete. As you can see, we have our home page, our discover page, and our join page, and they all look exactly like the mockup that we have created over here by DevEd. So if you haven't already checked out his video on how to create these designs, please make sure you go over to his channel and check them out. He's a great guy, and I loved working with him to make these designs and to create this video for you. If you enjoyed the video, please make sure to check out my other CSS related videos linked over here, and subscribe to my channel for more content just like this. Thank you guys very much for watching, and have a good day.